Imagine stepping into a vast, ancient landscape, one that's shaped billions of lives, influenced cultures all across the globe. It's a system of thought that so many people find profound, yet, it's often seen through all these different lenses. Is it a religion?
Right.
Philosophy? Maybe a way of life?
Yeah, all of the above sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Today, we're diving deep into that very topic, Buddhism.
Great topic.
And our guide for this journey, our source material, is an incredibly comprehensive overview. It's drawn from extensive excerpts, a Wikipedia article on Buddhism, which gives us a really robust, structured foundation to work from.
And our aim here, our mission, if you like, is to really distill the most important nuggets of knowledge from this really rich source. Think of it as maybe your express lane to genuinely understanding Buddhism, from its ancient origins right up to its dynamic presence in the modern world. We'll explore its core concepts, its diverse practices, and that incredible global journey it's taken. We're looking for those surprising facts, those genuine aha moments that make learning worthwhile.
Love those aha moments.
Yeah.
So let's start with the basics then. What is Buddhism?
Fundamentally.
Yeah. Fundamentally, it's an Indian religion built upon teachings attributed to the Buddha himself.
He's a wandering teacher, right? From around the 6th or 5th century BCE.
That's the general consensus, yeah.
And here's something to consider right off the bat. It's currently the world's 4th largest religion.
Wow.
Yeah, around 320 million followers. That makes up about, 4% of the global population?
That's substantial.
It is. It began in the Eastern Gangetic Plain as what they called a Shanamana movement. And from there, it just steadily spread across Asia, eventually, much later, reaching the West in the 20th century.
And it's quite interesting, isn't it, that the name Buddhism itself is actually a term coined in the West.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I didn't know that. Yeah, it's an Occidental neologism, as the article puts it. The original terms were more like Buddha Dharma, meaning something like the doctrine of the enlightened one, or maybe Dharma Vinaya, the doctrine and disciplines.
So what do they call themselves?
Well, early followers in India didn't really call themselves Buddhists. They were more likely called Sakyans or Sakyabhiksu. The term Bodha seems to have been used mostly by outsiders looking in.
Fascinating. Okay, so at the heart of the Buddhist teachings, there's this concept he called the middle way.
The middle way. Crucial.
He outlined this path as the road to awakening and ultimately to full liberation from dukkha. That word dukkha, it's often translated as suffering or maybe unease.
Yeah, suffering, unsatisfactoriness, stress. It's a complex word.
And the key is that this middle way avoids extremes. So no severe asceticism, but also no excessive sensual indulgence. It's about finding a kind of balance.
Exactly. It's finding that path between deprivation and gratification. But it's also important to realize, while there's this central teaching, Buddhism isn't just one single uniform thing.
Right, it branched out.
It really did. Scholars recognize 2 major branches that exist today. First, there's Theravada. That means School of the Elders.
Okay.
This branch really emphasizes attaining nirvana, which literally means extinguishing or blowing out as the way to transcend the individual self and end that cycle of death and rebirth, what they call samsara.
And where is that mainly practiced?
You find Theravada widely practiced today in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia.
Got it. And the second branch?
The second major branch is Mahayana, which means the great vehicle.
Great vehicle. Okay.
This tradition focuses much more on the bodhisattva ideal. That's where an individual commits not just to their own liberation, but actively works for the liberation of all sentient beings.
That sounds quite different, more outward focused.
In a way, yes. And this is the predominant practice in places like Nepal, Bhutan, China, Malaysia, Vietnam, Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. So vast areas.
Huge reach. And wasn't there a third one mentioned? The Vajrayana?
Yes, Vajrayana, the indestructible vehicle. Now, this isn't usually seen as a totally separate branch, but more like a body of teachings that incorporates esoteric, tantric techniques.
Tantric?
Yeah. It's generally considered a tradition within Mahayana. You find it practiced in the Himalayan states, Tibet, Bhutan, also Mongolia, and even in parts of Russia like Kalmykia and Tuva. And Japanese Shingon Buddhism also preserves this tradition.
Wow. So Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana within Mahayana, it's already showing quite a bit of diversity.
Absolutely.
And what's truly remarkable, reading through the source, is the sheer breadth of the textual traditions in Buddhism.
Oh, immense.
Just think about it. The Buddhist canon is huge. It encompasses these incredibly rich philosophical traditions, countless textual collections.
And in so many languages.
Right, preserved in Sanskrit, Pali, Tibetan, Chinese.
Yeah.
It's not just one book, like you said. It's an entire universe of knowledge.
It really is a library built over centuries.
Now, let's maybe turn our attention to the figure at the center of it all. The Buddha himself.
The founder.
Yeah. The details surrounding his life in the early Buddhist texts are, well, let's be honest, a bit inconsistent. There's some uncertainty there.
True. History gets hazy that far back.
But the 5th century BCE is generally the best estimate for when he lived.
Yeah.
I think he was born in Lumbini, which is in present-day Nepal,
Right.
and raised in Kapilavastu. He seems to have spent his life primarily in what is now modern Bihar and Uttar Pradesh in India.
And this brings up a fascinating point, doesn't it? How much do we really know about his early life? Scholars have quite a debate around aspects like his family name Gautama, or Gautama in Pali, and his given name Siddhartha.
What's the debate about?
Well, and there's also scholarly discussion about the hagiographic legends, these sort of idealized, sometimes miraculous stories.
Like his father being a king.
Exactly. That claim versus the possibility he was born into an oligarchic Shakya community where maybe seniority mattered more than kingship. And some scholars even suggest that certain narratives, maybe about his life or his teachings or aspects of society back then, might have been added into the Buddhist texts at a later date. So reconstructing the history is a bit like detective work.
Right, peeling back layers. But regardless of those specific historical nuances, what seems consistently clear across the early texts is his profound motivation.
Yes, the why.
Gautama was deeply moved by the suffering, that dukkha we mentioned earlier, that he observed in life, in death, and in this seemingly endless repetition of rebirth, samsara. It was really this deep encounter with suffering that ignited his quest to find liberation, or nirvana.
And his spiritual journey was, well, quite comprehensive. He didn't just stick to one path initially.
No, he shopped around, so to speak?
You could say that. He initially sought wisdom from 2 meditation teachers, Arada Kalama and Udaka Ramakutta.
Okay.
And from them, he gained insights into really advanced meditative states like the sphere of nothingness and the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. Very subtle stuff. But he found their teachings ultimately insufficient for his goal. They didn't lead to total liberation.
So what next?
So he then turned to severe asceticism, pushing his body to the absolute limits with strict fasting, breath control, really harsh practices.
Did that work?
That, too, proved inadequate, fell short. It was only when he shifted his approach again, focusing deeply on meditative practice dhyana while sitting under that ficus religiosa tree.
The Bodhi tree.
The Bodhi tree, exactly, and Bodh Gaya. That's when he finally attained awakening, or Bodhi.
And the insight he gained from this awakening was truly transformative, wasn't it?
Profoundly so.
He achieved this deep understanding into how karma works, apparently even experienced insights into his past lives. This pivotal moment led to the complete ending of all those mental defilements, the asavas and a cessation of suffering and that whole cycle of rebirth and samsara.
And crucially, it also solidified his certainty that the middle way was indeed the correct spiritual path. Not too extreme, not too lax.
Yeah.
So, as a fully enlightened Buddha, he then dedicated the rest of his long life until he achieved final nirvana at age 80 in Kushinagar, India, to teaching the Dharma, the truth he had discovered.
And he gathered followers.
Yes, he drew many followers, established the Sangha, the monastic order, which would carry on and propagate his teachings.
And those teachings then evolved over centuries into the various schools we see today: Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana.
Precisely. It wasn't static.
Okay, so with the founder story in mind, let's pivot now to what this all means for the Buddhist worldview.
Yeah.
How do these insights fundamentally shape an understanding of reality itself?
Right. The core orientation, the basic framework of Buddhism, is really encapsulated in the Four Noble Truths, sometimes called the Truths of the Noble One.
Okay, the Four Noble Truths. Let's break them down.
They basically lay out this structure. We crave and cling to things that are inherently impermanent, and this clinging inevitably leads to dukkha. And dukkha, remember, is much deeper than just occasional pain or suffering. It's that pervasive, unsatisfactory nature of existence, that feeling that nothing quite satisfies permanently. It's what keeps us trapped in samsara, that endless cycle of rebirth and suffering.
So the first truth is?
The first truth is simply acknowledging dukkha. that this not being at ease, this suffering, is an innate characteristic of this cycle of grasping. It's inherent.
Okay, number 2.
The second truth, samudaya, reveals the cause. Dukkha is caused by tancha, that's craving, desire, attachment, or thirst.
The thirst for things to be different or to stay the same.
Exactly, clinging. Then the third truth, nirodha, offers the profound hope. Dukkha can be ended, or at least contained, by letting go of that tancha.
There's a way out.
There is. And finally, the fourth truth, marga, points to the path itself, the path leading to the confinement, the cessation of tancha and dukkha. And that path is famously the Noble Eightfold Path.
The Noble Eightfold Path. We'll definitely need to unpack that later. But building on these 4 noble truths, Buddhism also presents the 3 marks of existence, right, as fundamental characteristics of all phenomena.
Yes. The 3 marks, or tilakkhana, crucial for cutting through ignorance, or avidya, which is seen as the root cause of clinging, and dukkha.
So what are they?
Well, the first mark is dukkha itself, that pervasive unease or suffering we just discussed.
Right.
The second is anicca. That means impermanence, the understanding that everything, absolutely everything, is constantly changing. Nothing lasts.
Everything flows.
Precisely. And the third, and perhaps the most challenging conceptually, is anatta, the concept of non-self.
Non-self. So the idea that living things have no permanent, unchanging soul or fixed essence.
Exactly. No inherent, independent I at the core. And some schools even add a fourth mark, that nirvana itself is peaceful, shanta or shanti.
This anatta concept, no permanent self, it raises a fascinating question, doesn't it? If there's no fixed self, what actually gets reborn?
The million-dollar question. This brings us right to the cycle of rebirth, or saisara.
Okay.
Saisara literally means wandering or world, and it describes this continuous cyclic change, a fundamental assumption not just in Buddhism, but in many Indian religions.
And it's seen as inherently unsatisfactory.
It's inherently dukkha, yes. Painful, unsatisfactory. And it's perpetuated by desire, ignorance, avidya, and the karma that results from them. In fact, the primary historical justification for Buddhism has always been liberation from this very cycle, achieving nirvana.
And rebirth can happen in different realms.
Yes. Buddhist thought describes rebirth as potentially occurring in 6 realms, from heavenly beings and demigods down to humans, animals, hungry ghosts, and even hellish realms.
Wow.
But critically, it doesn't involve a soul or any fixed substance transferring, precisely because of the anatta doctrine. No permanent self to move from life to life.
What is reborn then?
Well, that's where you find some traditional disagreement. Some early texts mention an inexpressible personality construct, avacca. But the majority view, especially later, is that it's vijnana, or consciousness, a stream of consciousness conditioned by past actions that carries forward.
Okay, consciousness conditioned by
Karma. The quality of one's rebirth, the realm you end up in, directly depends on the merit or demerit accumulated from your past karma.
Which leads us directly to karma, a concept many people think they know, but it has very specific nuances in Buddhism.
Very specific. Karma comes from Sanskrit, meaning action or work. And it's seen as the powerful force driving samsara, this endless cycle of suffering and rebirth.
Good actions, bad actions.
Right. Skillful, good deeds, kusala, and unskillful, bad deeds, akusala, produce seeds. These seeds ripen later, either in this life or a future one, as consequences.
But it's important to understand, the article notes, that Buddhist karma doesn't imply fatalism, right? Not everything is predetermined.
Absolutely not. Nor does it suggest that everything bad that happens to you is your own past karma. Suffering caused by, say, a natural disaster or someone else's actions is considered non-karma suffering.
Right.
But the truly profound part of Buddhist karma, the real core of it, is that intention, or satana, is absolutely essential.
Intention, that's the key.
That is the key. It's essential for a consequence, phala or vipaka, to arise from an action. This is a major difference from, say, Jainism, where karma was seen to accumulate almost physically, regardless of intent.
Mm-hmm.
In Buddhism, good or bad karma accumulates even from just ill or good thoughts. It's not just about physical actions. It includes speech and, crucially, the mind.
So your thoughts have karmic weight.
Definitely. And this karma affects everything. The form and realm of your rebirth, your social class, your basic character traits, even major life circumstances. But it's seen as operating impersonally, almost like a natural law, like physics or gravity. Not a divine judge.
Impersonal, like cause and effect.
Exactly.
And there was one interesting, though maybe controversial aspect mentioned, merit transfer.
Ah, yes, that's more a feature of later, particularly Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhism. The idea that good karma, or merit, accumulated by one person can actually be consciously transferred or dedicated to others, perhaps deceased relatives or even all beings.
Which wasn't really there in early Buddhism?
Generally absent, yes. It's a development.
Okay. And all this karma, rebirth, suffering, points towards the ultimate spiritual goal. Liberation, moksha, or nirvana.
Yes, the end goal. This means the complete cessation of the kleshas, the mental afflictions like greed, hatred, and delusion, and the final ending of the whole rebirth cycle.
Nirvana. What does that word actually mean?
Literally, it means blowing out, quenching, or becoming extinguished, like a flame going out. It implies a state of profound restraint and self-control.
Blowing out the fires of craving.
That's a common way to put it. And later texts directly link nirvana with anatta, non-self, and a state of complete emptiness or nothingness. It's described as being entered by passing through these gates of emptiness, sunyata, signlessness, anamita, and wishlessness, apranihita.
So it sounds kind of paradoxical. Liberation, highest happiness, bliss, fearlessness, permanence, but also emptiness and non-self.
It is described in ways that seem paradoxical to our ordinary minds. It's seen as unfathomable, indescribable, a spiritual release marked by realizing emptiness and non-self. But here's a crucial practical point the source makes.
What's that?
For most lay Buddhists throughout history, the primary day-to-day focus hasn't necessarily been on attaining nirvana in this lifetime. It's often been more about accumulating merit, good karma for better rebirths within the cycle of samsara.
Okay. So a more gradual approach for many.
A more pragmatic focus for many, yes.
This deep understanding of how things are interconnected, how karma leads to rebirth unless liberation is achieved, this is articulated through dependent arising, right? Pratityasamutpada.
Exactly. Pratityasamutpada, a cornerstone of Buddhist philosophy. It's the Buddhist theory explaining the nature and relations of being, becoming, existence, and ultimate reality.
And the core idea is?
The core idea is that absolutely nothing exists independently, with the sole profound exception of nirvana itself.
Everything depends on something else.
Everything. All physical and mental states depend on and arise from other pre-existing states. And as those states cease, they in turn give rise to other dependent states. It's a continuous web of cause and effect.
And this replaces the need for a creator god.
Precisely. What's truly insightful about Pratityasamutpada is that it frames causality itself as the very basis of existence. There's no need for a creator god or a universal self, Atman, or any other kind of transcendent independent principle pulling the strings. It's all about conditioned arising.
Conditioned arising.
Yeah, linking phenomena not just within a single life, but across lifetimes. This theory is famously applied to the 12 nidanas, the 12 links of causation.
To chain of suffering.
You got it. It illustrates how endless cycles of dukkha and rebirth originate. For example, ignorance, avidya, is the first link, which leads to karmic formations, saskaras, which then lead to consciousness, vijnana, and so on, down the chain, ultimately culminating in aging, death, and suffering.
So liberation comes from breaking the chain.
Exactly. By understanding and cutting these links, particularly ignorance, the whole cycle unravels.
Let's maybe delve just a bit deeper into not self and emptiness, shunyata. We touched on anatta, no unchanging self or soul. The source mentions analyzing personality through 5 aggregates.
Yes, the 5 skandhas, or aggregates: form, physical body, feeling pleasant, unpleasant, neutral; perception, cognizing objects; mental formations, volitions, intentions, tendencies; and consciousness, awareness of objects. The analysis shows that none of these components, individually or collectively, constitutes a permanent, independent self. They're all impermanent, conditioned processes.
So the self we perceive is more like a bundle of changing processes.
A useful convention, but ultimately an illusion if seen as solid and permanent. And this leads directly to emptiness, or shunyata.
Okay.
In early Buddhism, emptiness often meant that these 5 aggregates are void, hollow, coreless, basically, empty of a self.
Empty of a self, got it.
Right.
But Mahayana took it further.
It did, especially in the Madhyamaka school, founded by Nagarjuna. Emptiness there takes on a much broader, deeper meaning. It means all phenomena, not just the self, but tables, chairs, thoughts, everything are without svabhava.
Svabhava, what's that?
Svabhava means something like own nature, intrinsic existence, or inherent essence. It was a common philosophical idea in India at the time, arguing that things have a fixed, independent essence that makes them what they are. Mahayana's emptiness doctrine radically refuted this. It argued that everything is empty of that kind of inherent, independent existence because everything arises dependently, pratikya samutpada. Nothing stands alone.
So emptiness isn't nothingness, it's emptiness of independence.
Precisely. It's a refutation of inherent existence, pointing back to dependent arising as the ultimate nature of reality.
Wow. Okay, so after exploring these core ideas, dependent arising, non-self emptiness, what truly stands out to you? How do these reshape maybe our understanding of existence?
For me, the real aha isn't just that everything is connected, although that's profound. It's that this very interconnectedness, this dependent arising, is the ultimate reality. There's nothing deeper behind it. And realizing that, understanding that deeply, frees you from that futile, painful search for some kind of fixed independent self or an external creator God. It puts the power, the potential for transformation, squarely within the web of conditions that we ourselves are part of and can influence through our actions and intentions.
Yeah, it's a completely different way to view our own agency, isn't it? Not as a separate self acting on the world, but as part of the world acting within it.
Beautifully put.
Okay, but that profound theory, that worldview, it's nothing without practice. Right?
Absolutely useless without practice.
So let's unpack the practical side of this path. Buddhism isn't just a philosophy to ponder. It's a living, breathing set of practices to do.
Exactly. And the most widely known practical framework is, of course, the Noble Eightfold Path.
Right. The fourth noble truth.
Precisely. It's a set of 8 interconnected factors that, when you develop them together, lead to the cessation of dukkha. They're not sequential steps, more like spokes on a wheel.
Interconnected.
Okay.
And they're grouped.
Traditionally grouped into 3 basic divisions. First is wisdom, or prajna.
Wisdom.
This includes right view.
Yeah.
Basically, having a correct understanding of reality aligned with Buddhist principles, belief in karma, rebirth, the Four Noble Truths, and the Buddha's path to nirvana, and right intention, cultivating intentions of peaceful renunciation, letting go, non-sensuality, non-ill will, which is like loving kindness, and compassion, moving away from cruelty.
So, seeing things correctly and intending correctly. What's next?
Next comes moral virtues, or shila, ethical conduct.
Ethics.
This covers right speech, avoiding lying, harsh or rude speech, gossip, divisive speech, idle chatter, basically speaking truthfully and beneficially, in ways that lead towards salvation. Then, right action. No killing or injuring, no stealing or taking what's not freely given. For monastics, this means celibacy. For lay Buddhists, avoiding sexual misconduct like adultery. And right livelihood. For monks, this traditionally meant begging alms to sustain life simply. For lay Buddhists, it means abstaining from occupations that inherently cause suffering, things like trading in weapons, living beings, meat, intoxicants, or poisons.
Making a living ethically. Makes sense. And the third division?
The third is meditation, or samadhi, mental cultivation.
Meditation.
This encompasses right effort, actively guarding against unwholesome thoughts, preventing negative states from arising, and cultivating positive ones that support meditation.
Right. Mindfulness, Sadi.
Worthy.
Maintaining full awareness of the present moment, being conscious of your body, feelings, mind, and actions, and remembering the principle of impermanence.
Staying present and aware. Exactly. And finally, right concentration, dhyana. This refers to correct meditation practice, specifically the development of deep states of mental calm and absorption, classically explained as the 4 jhanas.
The 4 jhanas. Deep meditative states.
Yes, states of profound focus and equanimity.
Okay, so that's the Eightfold Path. Wisdom, ethics, meditation. But beyond that framework, there are many other common practices that Buddhists engage in, right?
Oh, absolutely. A really fundamental first step mentioned in the texts is simply hearing and learning the Dharma, the Buddha's teachings.
Listening and studying.
Yes, because that builds confidence and faith, saddha, based on understanding, not just blind belief. It's essential for knowing what to practice.
And that naturally leads to
taking refuge. This is a foundational act for Buddhists, taking refuge in the 3 jewels or 3 refuges.
the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha.
Exactly. The Buddha, the awakened teacher, the Dharma, his teachings, the truth, and the Sangha, the community, especially the monastic community, preserving the path. You often recite an ancient formula. I go to the Buddha as refuge, I go to the Dhamma as refuge, I go to the Sangha as refuge. It's considered a protective and uplifting act of commitment.
A declaration of intent.
In a way, yes. And then there's Sula again, Buddhist ethics, which are deeply rooted in that principle of non-harming, hissa.
Non-harming.
The bedrock. The 5 precepts are seen as the minimal standard of ethical conduct for all Buddhists, the baseline.
Let's recap those quickly.
Sure. Abstaining from 1, killing living beings, 2, taking what is not given, stealing, fraud, 3, sexual misconduct, 4, false speech, lying, and 5, intoxicants that lead to carelessness or heedlessness.
The basic moral code.
Right. And for monastic communities, monks and nuns, there's a much more detailed code of conduct called the Vinaya. This includes texts like the Padamukka, which lists specific rules. For example, Theravada monks have 227 offenses they train under.
227. That's detailed.
Very. Monastics intentionally cut many social ties and follow these institutionalized rules, which really shape their entire lives.
Closely related to these ethics, the source mentions practices of restraint and renunciation.
Yes, sense restraint, or indriya samvara. This means guarding the doors of our senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind, to prevent desires, aversion, and discontent from arising when we encounter sense objects.
So not getting carried away by sights, sounds, tastes.
Exactly. It's a kind of mindful attention that avoids dwelling on attractive or unattractive features, preventing the mind from getting hooked. And then there's renunciation, or nekkhamma.
Giving things up.
Giving up unwholesome actions and, more deeply, the desires that fuel them, like lust for sensuality, craving for worldly possessions or status. This can be cultivated through acts of generosity, giving, adopt a monastic life, practicing celibacy, contemplating the drawbacks of sensual pleasure, or even simple moderation, like the monk's practice of not eating after noon.
Moderation seems key.
Very much so.
And a truly central practice mentioned is mindfulness, sati, in clear comprehension, sampajanya.
Hugely important. Sati is that full awareness of the present moment, strengthening memory, preventing distraction, being really conscious of what you're doing right now. Sampajanya is the ability to clearly comprehend your own actions and mental states, knowing if they are wholesome or unwholesome, skillful or unskillful.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How often are we truly aware of our own minds and intentions in just everyday life? This practice seems designed to bring that awareness right to the forefront.
Absolutely. It's about knowing your mind.
And then, of course, there's meditation, encompassing samadhi and taya. We mentioned right concentration, but the source talks about a wide range of practices.
A very wide range. While forms of meditation certainly existed in India before the Buddha, his teachings introduced a unique focus and methodology, particularly through those 4 jhanas we mentioned. Samadhi generally refers to a calm, undistracted, concentrated state of mind, mental unification. And Dhyana specifically refers to these states of perfect equanimity and heightened awareness achieved through specific meditative training.
It's interesting. The source notes that while yogic and meditative traditions are found even in the ancient Rig Veda, Buddhist texts provide some of the earliest detailed descriptions of specific techniques.
That's right. Some scholars see the 4 dhyānas as a distinctly Buddhist innovation, refining or perhaps reinterpreting earlier practices. It's clear the Buddha placed a unique emphasis on them as part of the path to awakening.
And within meditation, there are other specific types mentioned, like the formless attainments.
Yes, the arupa samapatis. These are 4 very subtle, deep meditative states beyond the jhanas, focused on concepts like infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, and finally, neither perception nor non-perception. Attaining these is traditionally believed to lead to rebirth in corresponding formless heavens, very high realms.
Wow. And the interplay between meditation and insight, samatha and vipassana.
Crucial distinction. Samatha, often translated as calm or tranquility, refers to practices aimed at stilling and concentrating the mind, developing that state of samadhi. Vipassana, meaning insight or clear seeing, refers to practices aimed at generating wisdom, directly understanding the true nature of reality, those 3 marks of existence: impermanence, suffering, and non-self.
So calm and insight.
Exactly. And they are seen as mutually supportive, like 2 wings of a bird. Calm provides the stable foundation for insight to arise clearly. There's some scholarly debate about whether you develop them sequentially or simultaneously, but most traditions see them as intertwined.
Got it. Another significant set mentioned are the Brahma Viharas.
Ah, the divine abodes, or 4 immeasurables. Beautiful practices. These are virtues, but also specific meditation directions aimed at cultivating boundless states of mind.
Which are?
Loving kindness, metta, wishing well-being for all beings, compassion, karuna, wishing for all beings to be free from suffering, empathetic joy, mudita, rejoicing in the happiness and success of others, and equanimity, upekkha, maintaining a balanced, impartial mind towards all beings, free from attachment and aversion. Cultivating these is said to lead to heavenly rebirths in the Brahma realms.
Those sound universally positive.
They really are. And then especially prominent in Tantric Buddhism, Vajrayana, you have practices involving Tantra, visualization, and subtle body awareness.
Right, we mentioned Vajrayana earlier.
These practices often involve mentally visualizing Buddhas, bodhisattvas, or deities, working with mandalas, sacred diagrams, reciting mantras, sacred syllables or phrases, and sometimes working with subtle energy channels and centers within the body. Tibetan Buddhism, in particular, sees these as highly effective, sometimes quite rapid methods for cultivating calm, insight, and transformation.
More advanced techniques, perhaps.
Often considered so, yes. And all these practices, ethics, concentration, wisdom cultivation, ultimately aim to develop insight, prajna, and knowledge, vipassana.
Back to wisdom.
Back to wisdom. Prajna is that penetrating wisdom or knowledge of existence's true nature. Vipassana is the insight itself. The ultimate goal here is to overcome ignorance, avidya, about reality, especially its impermanence and non-self nature. This deep seeing leads to dispassion, detachment, and ultimately liberation from dukkha and the whole cycle of samsara.
It all ties back together.
It really does.
Now, what about devotion? Sometimes Buddhism is portrayed in the West as purely philosophical, but the source mentions sada, shraddha, bhakti.
Absolutely. Devotion plays a very important role in most Buddhist traditions. Sada, or shraddha, means trustful confidence or faith, but ideally it's balanced by wisdom, not just blind belief. It's faith grounded in understanding or experience.
And how is it practiced?
Devotional practices include things like ritual prayer, making offerings like flowers, incense, food, prostration, bowing, pilgrimage to holy sites, and chanting. These are often focused on holy objects like statues of Buddhas or bodhisattvas, stupas, relic mounds, or Bodhi trees.
Chanting, too.
Yes, chanting is very common across traditions. It can be used to recite scriptures, invoke blessings, or cultivate specific mental states like tranquility, often done using malas like Buddhist rosaries to count repetitions. It helps focus the mind and internalize the teachings.
Okay. And finally, a topic that often comes up, vegetarianism and animal ethics. How does Buddhism approach this?
It's a significant aspect, rooted again in ahimsa, non-harming. There's strong condemnation of intentionally harming sentient beings. The Buddha himself clearly condemned animal sacrifice and explicitly forbade his monks and nuns from killing animals or asking others to kill for them.
But could monks eat meat?
This is where it gets complex. Early texts indicate that monastics were allowed to eat meat if it met the 3 times clean rule. They hadn't seen, heard, or suspected that the animal was specifically killed for them. It was about not creating demand for killing. However, the Buddha also explicitly stated that earning a livelihood from the meat trade butchery, hunting was unethical, part of wrong livelihood.
So a distinction between consuming and causing the killing.
Yes. But then, many Mahayana sutras take a much stronger stance, actively promoting vegetarianism out of direct compassion for animals. They argue that eating meat indirectly supports killing.
So different views emerged.
Very different views. And that's why, as the source notes, this remains a much debated topic within Buddhism even today. Different schools, different cultures have different norms and interpretations regarding diet.
Okay, that covers a lot of ground on practices. So how were these profound teachings, this complex worldview, and these diverse practices actually preserved, spread, and adapted throughout history to become the global force it is today? What does this all mean for its journey through time?
Now we get into the epic story of its transmission and evolution. It starts with the Buddhist texts.
Right, we mentioned the vastness earlier. How were they first passed on?
Initially, it was purely an oral tradition for centuries. Transmitted in Middle Indo-Aryan languages, Prakrits like Pali, through communal recitation and sophisticated mnemonic techniques to aid memory.
Wow, entirely oral for centuries. When were they first written down?
The first known writing down happened in Sri Lanka, maybe around 400 years or so after the Buddha's passing. This became part of the collection known as the Tripitakas.
And what's really unique, as we touched on, is that there isn't a single universally accepted Buddhist canon, like the Bible or the Quran.
Exactly. The canonical corpus is vast, and each major tradition tends to have its own collection, sometimes overlapping, sometimes distinct. The Chinese Buddhist canon, for example, has over 2,100 texts in 55 volumes. The Tibetan canon has thousands of texts attributed to the Buddha and later Indian scholars. Just in one cave complex in Dunhuang, China, they found over 40,000 manuscripts. It's staggering.
Incredible diversity. What are considered the early Buddhist texts?
Generally, the first four Pali Nikayas, collections of discourses, and their corresponding Chinese igamas are considered among the earliest strata of texts. They show literary structures that strongly suggest they derive from that oral transmission period.
And these later evolved into the Tripitakas, the triple baskets.
That's right, a common way of organizing the canons. You have the Vinaya Pitaka, basket of discipline, focusing on monastic rules and conduct. The Sutta Pitaka, basket of discourses, containing the sermons and teachings attributed mainly to the Buddha and his close disciples. And the Abhidhamma Pitaka, basket of higher doctrine, which offers more scholastic, systematic classifications and analyses of the teachings found in the suttas.
3 baskets: rules, discourses, analysis.
You got it. And the Pali Tipitaka, belonging to the Theravada school, is the only complete collection in an Indic language that has survived intact from ancient times.
What about the Mahayana texts? When did they appear?
Mahayana Sutras started appearing later, maybe around the 1st century BCE or 1st century CE. These are considered authentic, original teachings by Mahayana traditions themselves, often given even greater authority than the earlier texts. They saw them as teachings revealed for those of greater spiritual capacity, ready for deeper insights like emptiness and the Bodhisattva path.
So new revelations, in a sense.
From their perspective, yes. Mahayana also produced a huge body of philosophical treatises called Shastras and commentaries, Frittis, explaining these sutras.
And then the Tantric texts.
Those developed somewhat later still, really flourishing during India's Gupta Empire period, around 4th, 6th century CE, and becoming quite influential by the 8th century. These texts, associated with Vajrayana, incorporate more esoteric elements. Mantras, visualizations, subtle body meditations, working with fierce deities, and sometimes even practices that seemed antinomian or transgressive to outsiders, like the ritual use of alcohol or sexual symbolism. They often borrowed elements from other Indian religious traditions, like Shaivism.
A whole other layer of texts and practices.
Indeed. So, to understand the history of Buddhism, we have to place its origins back in Iron Age India, during that period called the Second Urbanization.
Right, a time of big changes.
Huge changes. Growth of towns, increased trade, the composition of the Upanishads, and the rise of these various non-Vedic religious movements called the shaman traditions.
And Buddhism was one of these.
Yes. Buddhism, Jainism, Ajivika, they were parallel to, but distinct from, the mainstream Vedic religion based on the authority of the Vedas and the Brahmin priests. These Shramanta movements largely challenge core Brahmanic assumptions like Atman, an eternal unchanging soul or self, Brahman, the ultimate reality, the nature of the afterlife, and the absolute authority of the Vedas.
So a counter-movement in some ways.
In many ways, yes. Although, interestingly, Brahmanical motifs and concepts do appear frequently in the oldest Buddhist texts, often repurposed or used to explain Buddhist ideas to an audience familiar with them.
Okay. How did Indian Buddhism itself evolve?
Scholars often divide it into periods. Early Buddhism, often called pre-sectarian, then Nikaya, or sectarian Buddhism, the emergence of different schools, followed by early Mahayana, late Mahayana, and finally the Vajrayana period.
What about pre-sectarian Buddhism? Is there agreement on what the Buddha originally taught?
While the idea of a perfectly unified original Buddhism is debated, many scholars agree that core teachings like the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, Nirvana, the Three Marks of Existence, impermanence, suffering, non-self, the 5 aggregates, dependent origination, karma, and rebirth, almost certainly go back to the earliest period, as they appear consistently across the earliest textual collections.
But there are still debates.
Oh, yes. There's ongoing scholarly debate about the precise authenticity and the original centrality of certain doctrines versus others. History is never quite that simple.
Right. And then came the Ashokan era and early schools. Ashoka was a key figure.
Hugely important. Emperor Ashoka, around 304-232 BCE, was a powerful ruler who became a public supporter and patron of Buddhism after a bloody war. This royal patronage led to the construction of many stupas, relic monuments and temples, and significantly boosted the spread of Buddhism throughout his empire and even beyond, sending emissaries to places like Sri Lanka and potentially even the Mediterranean.
And the first schools started forming around this time.
The traditional accounts place the first Buddhist council shortly after the Buddha's death, aiming to preserve his teachings, though its historicity is questioned by some scholars. The second Buddhist council, held perhaps a century later, is generally seen as more historical and likely led to the first major schism in the Sangha.
A split. Over what?
Initially, it seems to have been over points of monastic discipline, the Nyaya, but it led to the separation between the Staviras, elders, and the Mahasaikas, great community, a division that eventually deepened into more significant doctrinal disagreements. This was the beginning of the different Nikaya schools.
Okay. And after Ashoka?
The post-Ashokan expansion saw Buddhism truly become a world religion. Ashoka's emissaries may have reached Hellenistic kingdoms in the West. More significantly, Buddhism spread rapidly along the ancient trade routes, especially the Silk Road connecting India with Central Asia and China.
The Silk Road connection.
Vital. This led to fascinating cross-cultural interactions, like Greco-Buddhism in regions like Gandhara, modern Pakistan, Afghanistan, where Buddhist art adopted Hellenistic styles. You even have texts like the Milindapana describing dialogues between a Buddhist sage and a Greek king. The Kushan Empire, around 30 through 375 CE, which straddled these regions, also became major patrons, further facilitating the spread.
But it eventually declined in India itself.
Sadly, yes. Over many centuries. Factors included the resurgence of Hindu traditions, loss of royal patronage in many areas, and then particularly devastatingly, the series of Islamic invasions starting around the 10th, 12th century CE, which led to the destruction of major monastic centers like Nalanda. By the 13th century, Buddhism had largely vanished from the land of its birth, though it was flourishing elsewhere.
Tragic irony. What about Mahayana Buddhism's origins?
They're actually not that well understood, quite complex, with various theories. It probably didn't start as a separate formal school, but more as a movement or a set of ideals, particularly the bodhisattva ideal within existing monastic communities.
So an internal development first.
Likely. Early textual evidence comes mainly from Chinese translations of Mahayana sutras, like those by the missionary Lokakamma in the 2nd century CE. Mahayana experienced rapid growth, especially from the 5th and 6th centuries onwards. This period saw the rise of massive monastic university complexes like Nalanda and Vikramashila, which became major centers of learning.
Universities, like actual universities.
Very much so. Centers for study, debate, translation, attracting scholars from all over Asia. Mahayana also developed sophisticated philosophical schools. The source mentions 4 major types of thought. Madhyamaka, the middle way school focusing on emptiness. Yogacara, the mind-only school. The concept of Buddha nature, Tathagatagar, the idea that all beings have the potential for Buddhahood. And the influential school of Buddhist logic and epistemology developed by Dignaga and Dharmakirti.
The philosophical flowering.
Absolutely. And this period led into late Indian Buddhism and Tantra. Buddhism continued to flourish under empires like the Guptas and later the Palas in eastern India. This is when Tantric Buddhism, or Vajrayana, really developed its distinctive practices and literature, building on Mahayana foundations, but adding these new esoteric techniques.
Where did Tantra come from?
There's debate here, too. Some scholars see its roots in a kind of pan-Indian religious substrate of esoteric practices, while others point to specific influences from Hindu Shaiva Tantras. It definitely incorporated elements beyond earlier Buddhist frameworks. But as we mentioned, this late flourishing in India eventually declined due to loss of state support and further invasions.
Okay, so while it declined in India, it was spreading elsewhere.
Massively. The spread to East and Southeast Asia is a huge part of the story.
China first.
Yes, reaching China probably via the Silk Road sometime in the late Han Dynasty, maybe late 2nd or 1st century CE. From China, it then spread to Korea around the 4th century CE, Japan 6th, 7th century CE, and also down into Vietnam as early as the 1st, 2nd century CE.
Quite a journey.
Indeed. China's Tang Dynasty, 618-907 CE, was a golden age for Buddhism there, seeing the introduction of esoteric, tantric Buddhism and the rise of uniquely Chinese schools like Chan, which would become Zen in Japan. Later, during the Song Dynasty, 960 to 1279 CE, Chan heavily influenced Korean and Japanese Buddhism. Pure Land Buddhism became immensely popular, and incredibly, the entire Chinese Buddhist canon was printed using woodblocks.
Wow, printing the whole canon.
A monumental undertaking. Meanwhile, Indian esoteric Buddhism, Vajrayana, also spread directly north into Tibet, probably starting in the 7th, 8th centuries, and from there into Mongolia during the Middle Ages.
And Southeast Asia.
That followed a different route, mostly influenced by Theravada Buddhism coming from Sri Lanka and India. Theravada arrived in Sri Lanka very early, traditionally in the 3rd century BCE with Ashoka's missions. From Sri Lanka and India, it gradually spread throughout mainland, Southeast Asia, Myanmar, Malaysia, Indonesia, though later largely replaced by Islam there, Thailand, Cambodia, and coastal Vietnam.
So different streams flowing to different regions, the Theravada south and east, Mahayana north and east?
Broadly speaking, yes. Which leads us back to the schools and traditions we see today. As we said, Buddhists generally classify themselves as either Theravada or Mahayana, a distinction many scholars also use.
And the key differences again.
While both revere Shakyamuni Buddha and accept core teachings like the Middle Way and the Four Noble Truths, they have significant differences. Mahayana, as we noted, reveres numerous other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, while Theravada focuses almost exclusively on the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, and past Buddhas. Mahayana emphasizes the bodhisattva path, seeking enlightenment for the sake of all beings as the ideal for all practitioners, whereas Theravada traditionally sees Buddhahood as extremely rare, with the primary goal for most being arahantship, personal liberation, viewing the bodhisattva path as an optional, incredibly long, and heroic undertaking for a select few.
And their texts differ.
Yes, their views on scripture differ too. Mahayana accepts the authority of its own vast body of sutras in addition to the earlier texts, while Theravada generally holds the Pali Canon as the sole authoritative scripture.
Got it. What about the physical places? Monasteries and temples?
Well, although the earliest monastics were wanderers, Buddhist communities gradually became more settled, establishing monasteries. These institutions became centers of learning, practice, and culture. The structures themselves vary widely by region and tradition.
The examples?
You have the ancient rock-hewn cave complexes in India like Ajanta, the monastery compounds called viharas, memorial structures called stupas. The Mahabodhi temple in Bodh Gaya marks the spot of the Buddha's enlightenment. In Southeast Asia, you find temple complexes known as wats. In Japan, monastery complexes are called garan. In the Indo-Tibetan world, they're often called gompas.
So many different names and styles.
Reflecting the cultural adaptations. And importantly, the modern era has also seen a significant rise in non-monastic meditation centers, often geared towards laypersons seeking instruction in mindfulness and other practices outside a traditional temple setting.
Right. That brings us to Buddhism in the modern era. It's faced challenges, hasn't it?
Yeah. Significant challenges. During the colonial era, Buddhism in many parts of Asia faced pressure and missionary efforts from Christian colonial powers. It also faced persecution under various modern states, both communist and nationalist. And like all ancient traditions, it's had to engage with the challenges posed by modern science and secularism.
How did it respond?
One major response was the rise of Buddhist modernism in the late 19th and 20th centuries. Thinkers and reformers, often interacting with Western ideas, sought to reinterpret Buddhism, emphasizing its rational, scientific, and psychological aspects, sometimes downplaying traditional cosmology or ritual elements. Figures like the American Henry Steele Olcott and the Sri Lankan Anagarika Dharmapala were key in promoting this view, portraying Buddhism as compatible with, even superior to, Western modernity.
Interesting. Kind of rebranding.
In some ways, yes. A conscious effort to present Buddhism in a way that resonated with modern sensibilities. Meanwhile, in East Asia, Buddhism was severely impacted by devastating wars like the Taiping Rebellion in China and WWII, as well as political movements like the Cultural Revolution, which sought to eradicate religion.
But there's been a revival.
Yes, particularly in China, there has been a significant revival of Buddhism since the late 1970s. However, communist repression in places like Tibet and Mongolia had, and continues to have, a strongly negative impact. And tragically, we've also seen the deliberate destruction of priceless historical Buddhist monuments by Islamic militants in recent decades, like the giant Buddhas of Bamiyan in Afghanistan or sites in Pakistan.
Such a loss. What about Buddhism in the West? How did that unfold?
It's a more recent but fascinating story. Serious academic study by Western scholars really began in the 19th century, with figures like Eugene Burnouf in France, Max Mueller in Germany, and T.W. Rhys-Davids in Britain, who founded the crucial Pali Text Society to translate Theravada scriptures. This is when terms like Buddhism actually came into common usage in European languages.
And people started converting.
Yes. The late 19th century saw the first Asian Buddhist immigrants arriving, primarily from China and Japan, building temples for their communities. It also saw the first high-profile Western converts like Helena Blavatsky, co-founder of Theosophy, and Henry Steele Olcott. A landmark event was the 1893 World Parliament of Religions in Chicago, which introduced several influential Asian Buddhist leaders like Anagarika Dharmapala and Soyen Shaku, a Zen master, to the Western public for the first time.
Turning point.
Definitely raised its profile. The 20th century saw the slow growth of Buddhist institutions in the West and, crucially, more and more translations of texts becoming available. But the real boom happened after World War II.
Why then?
Several factors converged. increased immigration from Asian Buddhist countries, globalization making ideas travel faster, growing secularization, leading some to seek alternatives to traditional Western religions, and perhaps most visibly, the counterculture movements of the 1960s, which embraced Eastern philosophies.
The Beat Generation, Alan Watts.
Exactly. Figures like the Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki, writers like Jack Kerouac, philosophers like Alan Watts, and later influential teachers like the Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh and, of course, the 14th Dalai Lama, brought different forms of Buddhism to widespread Western attention.
But it wasn't always an easy fit.
No, as the source notes, core traditional concepts like karma, rebirth, and even the Four Noble Truths, especially the emphasis on dukkha, have sometimes been problematic or interpreted very differently by Westerners compared to traditional Asian contexts.
Right.
Remember that historical focus for many Asian laypersons on accumulating merit for better rebirths rather than immediate nirvana, that often gets lost in Western adaptations focusing more on meditation for present life well-being.
Different priorities.
Different cultural contexts and priorities, yes. But today, Buddhism is undeniably a global religion. Its texts are translated into countless languages, and it exists in almost every country, adapting and evolving. It's even the official state religion in some countries, like Cambodia and Bhutan.
This global spread and adaptation has also led to some interesting neo-Buddhism movements, right? Ones that depart significantly from traditional beliefs.
Yes, quite significantly in some cases. A major example comes from India itself, the Navayana New Vehicle tradition.
Founded by?
Founded by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the famous social reformer and architect of the Indian Constitution. He was born into the Dalit untouchable caste and saw conversion to Buddhism as a way to escape the Hindu caste system's oppression.
But he reinterpreted Buddhism.
Radically so. Ambedkar's Navayana notably rejected foundational Buddhist doctrines like karma, rebirth, samsara, the goal of nirvana, monasticism, and even the Four Noble Truths as traditionally understood. He reinterpreted the Buddha primarily as a teacher of reason, morality, class struggle, and social equality, urging hundreds of thousands of Dalits to convert en masse in 1956, shortly before his death. It's a very socially and politically focused form of Buddhism.
Wow, that's a major departure. Any others mentioned?
The source also lists secular Buddhism, which strips away most metaphysical or religious elements, focusing on ethics and meditation as secular practices. There's One Buddhism, a modern Korean movement that integrates various spiritual traditions, and the Dhammakaya movement in Thailand, which is quite controversial because it teaches the doctrine of a true self, Dhammakaya, attainable through meditation, a view seen as heretical, directly contradicting the core Anatta doctrine by many traditional Theravada monks.
So ongoing innovation and controversy.
Always. And unfortunately, it's also part of the historical record, as the source briefly notes, that Buddhist communities, like many large religious institutions, have not been immune to issues of sexual abuse and misconduct, particularly within some Western Zen and Tibetan Buddhist communities. There have been documented cases involving prominent teachers, sometimes accompanied by, as the article puts it, huge cover-ups, like the well-known case involving Sojal Rinpoche.
Yeah.
It's a difficult but necessary aspect to acknowledge.
Indeed. Okay, just a couple more points from the source. How is Buddhism classified? Is it definitely a religion?
Well, scholars generally do agree that it is a religion. However, it certainly poses challenges to standard Western definitions of religion that are often based on a theistic conception, belief in a personal creator god.
Because there's no creator god in Buddhism.
Yeah. Generally, no. Which is perhaps why some Westerners, particularly those drawn to Buddhist modernism or secular interpretations, prefer to view it more as a philosophy or simply a way of life. But the source points out that this view itself has historical roots in those 19th century Orientalist reinterpretations, trying to fit Buddhism into Western categories. In Asia, it has functioned as a religion for millennia.
Makes sense. And finally, the cultural influence.
Oh.
It seems undeniable.
Oh, absolutely immense. Buddhism has profoundly shaped Asian cultures, influencing politics, ethics, philosophy, literature, art, architecture, social customs, you name it. It also interacted deeply with other major traditions like Hinduism, Taoism, and Confucianism, mutually influencing each other. And Buddhist monasteries played a crucial role for centuries in preserving classical Indian knowledge in fields like medicine, astronomy, and logic, especially after it declined in India itself.
And its influence in the West today.
Growing, certainly. Beyond those who identify as Buddhists, its influence can be seen in New Age spirituality, in modern psychology, especially through mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, and other therapies incorporating mindfulness, and even in some schools of psychoanalysis that engage with Buddhist ideas about the mind and self.
What a journey. We've really covered a lot of ground. We've navigated through Buddhism's core definitions, traced the transformative story of its founder, explored that intricate worldview of suffering and liberation,
Delved into the practical paths to awakening, uncovered its incredibly rich textual traditions and complex historical evolution.
and examined its dynamic, sometimes contentious presence in the modern world.
And looking back over it all, what truly stands out, I think, are those enduring core insights. That profound, millennia-long pursuit of liberation from suffering. The deep emphasis on developing wisdom and ethical conduct, jila and praja, and those truly revolutionary concepts of impermanence, anicca, non-self, anatta, and dependent arising, pratityasamutpada, that fundamentally challenge our ordinary, ingrained perceptions of reality.
They really do turn things upside down.
They do. So here's maybe a final thought to leave you with, something to mull over.
Okay.
Considering how Buddhism evolved, from these ancient oral traditions passed down through memory to these incredibly vast and diverse written canons, and how its core tenets like not self or emptiness are interpreted so differently across the various schools, and even within these new modern movements like Navayana or secular Buddhism, what does all that evolution and diversity tell you about the very nature of truth or ultimate reality itself, and maybe how we as humans continually seek to grasp and articulate it?
That's a deep one. The relationship between the teaching, the interpretation, and the ultimate goal. Lots to think about there. We certainly encourage you, the listener, to continue your own deep dive, perhaps by exploring some of the specific Buddhist texts or traditions that resonated most with you from our discussion today.